Welcome back to the Professor Insight podcast, the space where we explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, neuroscience, and emerging technology, and turn it into something practical for your business, your strategy, and your everyday thinking. I'm your host, Professor Billy. This week, we're diving into a recent piece of research that quietly reveals something many of us may not even realize we're doing, applying one standard to ourselves and another to everyone else, especially when it comes to using generative AI. The paper, titled Acceptability Lies in the Eye of the Beholder, Self-Other Biases in Gen AI Collaborations, was published in the International Journal of Research and Marketing and comes from a team at Erasmus University's Rotterdam School of Management. At its core, the research explores a surprisingly consistent pattern. People see their own use of tools like ChatGPT as legitimate, creative, even modest. It's kind of like, well, I just used it for inspiration. But when others use the exact same tools, we're more likely to think they outsourced the work or crossed some ethical line. Across 9 studies with nearly 4,500 participants, the researchers show that this self-other bias isn't a one-off. It's deeply ingrained and has very real consequences for how we judge the fairness, originality, and acceptability of AI-assisted work. What makes these findings so interesting is that they reveal a quiet but powerful psychological contradiction at the heart of how we engage with AI. We're increasingly collaborating with generative tools, not just for convenience, but as part of our creative and intellectual workflows. Yet this research shows that our judgments about how that collaboration is perceived depend heavily on who is involved. When we use Gen AI, we see ourselves as thoughtful, intentional, even restrained, using it for a spark of inspiration. But when others use it, we tend to assume they're taking shortcuts or offloading effort. This bias not only shapes our social and professional expectations, but also threatens to undermine fair assessment in education, hiring, publishing, and beyond. It's a mirror that forces us to confront not just how we use technology, but how we judge others for doing the same. And these findings matter, not just for academics or marketers, but for anyone navigating the blurred lines between human effort and machine support. If we don't recognize these biases, if educators, regulators, publishers, or even peers can't see how uneven these judgments are, we risk creating policies and cultural norms based more on perception than fairness. This paper pushes us to ask, who gets credit when AI is involved? Are we holding others to higher standards than ourselves? And what does that mean for trust, transparency, and accountability in a Gen AI world? This isn't just about psychology, it's about power, policy, and the future of collaboration between humans and machines. And understanding these biases might be the key to designing fairer systems, clearer rules, and more thoughtful AI interfaces. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're peeling back the layers on something it's quietly reshaping our world, generative AI. We're talking about tools like ChatGPT. They're absolutely everywhere now, aren't they? Workplaces, classrooms. And they've sparked some pretty lively debates. The big question everyone's asking is, what are the acceptable ways to use this powerful new tech? But for this deep dive, we want to go beyond just the surface chatter. We're aiming to pinpoint something crucial, something often overlooked in this whole debate. It's about how we judge our own contributions when we create something with Gen AI versus how we see others' contributions when they use the exact same tools. Turns out, our brains play some surprising tricks on us. We're going to unravel this by looking closely at a fascinating paper. It's titled Acceptability Lies in the Eye of the Beholder, Self-Other Biases in Gen AI Collaborations, and it's from the International Journal of Research and Marketing. So our mission today is to unpack these psychological biases, these subtle influences on whether we think Gen AI use is okay, and crucially, what that means for you, our listener. We've got 9 detailed studies to explore, so let's get right into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to maybe frame what we mean by Gen AI here, we're mainly talking about these powerful AI systems, like ChatGPT, that can generate what seems like really intelligent responses, right? Text, code, images, all from a human prompt. You can think of it as a highly sophisticated digital assistant, one that can create entirely new content, almost out of thin air. And ChatGPT specifically, it's free, you don't need any special tech know-how. That accessibility is exactly why it's being used for about everything, from drafting marketing plans to helping out with scientific writing. Now, the core idea this paper really zooms in on is something called self-other bias. And this isn't new, it's not unique to AI at all. It's a really deep-seated human tendency we have to evaluate ourselves differently than we evaluate others.
Right, like a fundamental way our thinking works.
Exactly. A classic example, you might have heard of it, is the fundamental attribution error.
Mm.
It's that thing where, when you're late, you think, oh, the traffic was terrible, or I had an unexpected emergency. You blame the situation.
External factors.
Right. But when someone else is late, you immediately think, oh, they're disorganized or they're irresponsible. Maybe even they just don't care. You jump straight to their character, their disposition.
That makes sense.
So the paper applies this exact same lens to Gen AI. It suggests that when we evaluate our own work, the stuff we co-produce with AI, we tend to focus on our good intentions. We tell ourselves, oh, I just used it for inspiration, or I only needed it for brainstorming. I didn't, outsource the whole thing. We give ourselves the benefit of the doubt.
You justify it to ourselves.
We do. But when we look at someone else's work that involved Gen AI, we often only see the action itself. They used a tool that could have done all the work. And this leads to what the researchers call a self-other bias in inferred contribution. Basically, we consistently give ourselves more credit for the work than we give others, even if the output looks pretty similar.
Wow. So our perspective really shifts depending on whether we're the creator or just looking at it from the outside.
Precisely. It's quite remarkable, really.
That connects so well to those everyday biases. Okay, so let's dive into the evidence then. The authors ran, 9 studies for this paper involving nearly 4,500 participants. That's a huge amount of data.
It really is an extensive piece of research. And what's so fascinating is that across all these different experiments, they consistently found really strong evidence for this self-other difference in how contribution is perceived. And crucially, they carefully documented how this difference in perception directly impacts whether using Gen AI is seen as acceptable or not.
Okay, let's kick off with study 1 then. What was the initial setup? How did they first test this idea?
So their first big study, with over 1,000 U.S. participants, was pretty straightforward. They asked people just to imagine using ChatGPT for different kinds of tasks, things like writing, brainstorming, maybe learning something new. And then they had to estimate how much credit they, or maybe someone else, deserved for the final output versus how much credit the AI deserved. They essentially had them split 100 percentage points between the human contribution and the AI contribution.
Right. And what was the immediate finding from that? Anything surprising right off the bat?
Well, what they saw straight away was a really significant self-other bias. People consistently gave themselves about 17% more credit for work they imagined doing with Gen AI compared to how much credit they gave others for doing the same thing.
17%, that's quite a jump.
It is. On average, people felt they contributed about, say, 54.6% to their own Gen AI-assisted work, but they figured others only contributed around 38%. And this bias showed up across all the different areas: writing, creativity, learning. Didn't matter what the specific task was.
So clear initial evidence, even just from imagining it, we're definitely more generous with ourselves.
That's the takeaway, yeah.
Wow, okay. A 17% difference just from thinking about it. So how did they move from these imagined scenarios to, actual usage? Studies 2A and 2B sound like they got people to really use the tool.
Exactly. They took it a step further. These next 2 studies were clever. They used something called a yoked design.
Yoked design, how does that work?
Think of it like a paired experiment. So in the self-condition, participants actually used ChatGPT. They wrote a paragraph about their strengths and weaknesses, say for a job application, and then they rated their own contribution to that paragraph.
Okay, so they did the task themselves.
Right. Then, in the other condition, a totally different group of participants would look at that same paragraph written by someone in the first group, and they had to infer how much the original writer contributed.
Ah, okay. So a direct comparison based on the same output.
Exactly. It allows for much more real-world comparison.
And study 2B added another twist, didn't it? Something about experience.
Yes, exactly. In 2B, they introduced what they called an other experience group. These participants first wrote their own paragraph using ChatGPT, so they got hands-on experience with the tool and the task. Then, after doing it themselves, they evaluated someone else's paragraph.
Ah, so the idea was to see if actually using the tool might make people, less biased when judging others. Like maybe they'd understand the process better.
That was the hypothesis, yeah. To see if personal experience could mitigate the bias.
Okay, so after all that real-world testing involving actual usage and experience, what did they find? Did the bias hold up?
Oh, it held up all right, powerfully. In study 2A, the perceived self-contribution was around 55.8%, significantly higher than the 35.1% attributed to others.
That's nearly an 18% difference. Still very strong.
Right. A really robust difference that just jumps out at you. And the study 2B confirmed it again. The self's contribution was about 59.1% versus somewhere between 41% and 44% for the other conditions, whether they had experience or not.
So it's a really persistent bias then. Did gaining that hands-on experience change how people judged others at all? Did it make them maybe less critical or?
Not really, not in terms of the size of the bias. That self-other difference remained pretty much the same, even when the evaluators had used the tool themselves, which is quite telling. But there was a fascinating little detail they found. The correlation between the self's inferred contribution and the other's inferred contribution actually increased over time between study 2A and study 2B.
Correlation increased. What does that suggest?
It suggests that while the overall level of bias remained, the evaluators might have been getting sort of better at detecting variations in how much ChatGPT was actually used by others.
So they might still be biased overall, but they're maybe getting more accurate at spotting the degree of AI use, like distinguishing between someone who used it a little versus a lot.
Exactly. It's as if their ability to sense the nuances improved, even if their fundamental judgment remained tilted in favor of the self.
Okay, interesting. So we've clearly established that this bias exists, and it's remarkably stubborn. But the big question is still why, right? What's driving it? What did study 3 try to figure out?
Right. Study 3, this one used a sample of Dutch students, really tried to dig into the types of Gen AI usage. The researchers have this theory. The bias isn't just about using AI generally, it's specifically about how we think we're using it versus how we think others are using it.
Okay.
They propose that we tend to assume we use Gen AI for inspiration, for brainstorming, noble purposes.
It's a good reason.
The good reasons. But we assume others are using it for outsourcing, just completely offloading the work. So to test this, they came up with a list of different Gen AI behaviors, like using ChatGPT to get ideas versus having it provide full solutions for a homework assignment. And they pre-tested these behaviors to categorize them along a spectrum, from clear inspiration attempts to clear outsourcing.
Okay, so they define different ways of using it. What did that reveal about how we perceive our own actions versus others?
Well, the results really backed up their predictions strongly. Participants consistently believed they were less likely to engage in any given Gen AI behavior compared to how likely they thought others were, almost like seeing themselves as more restrained or ethical users. And here's the kicker. The difference in perceived intentions, the gap between self and other, was much bigger for those behaviors classified as outsourcing.
So we really distance ourselves from the idea that we would just outsource, but we readily assume others might.
Precisely. It paints a really clear picture.
Yeah.
We grant ourselves the generous benefit of the doubt, framing our usage as seeking inspiration, while we're much quicker to assume others are just taking the easy way out, offloading their work.
So it's not just about using it differently, it's about our perception of the intent behind the usage. That seems like the core mechanism.
Exactly.
Did they directly test if these differing perceptions, this inspiration versus outsourcing idea, is what actually causes the self-other bias and how much credit we take?
Yes. Study 4 provided that direct evidence. They measured both things. The inferred contribution, that 100-point split again, and participants' perceptions about the usage behavior. They asked things like, when using ChatGPT, I or others only use it to get inspired, or do not directly copy anything, or still put in their own work.
Okay, connecting the dots directly.
Connecting the dots. And the powerful takeaway was crystal clear. The effect of the evaluation target, whether you were judging yourself or someone else on the inferred contribution, was mediated by these perceptions of usage behavior.
Mediated by, so basically the reason we give ourselves more credit is because we think we're using it for inspiration. Simply
Put, yes. The reason the self's contribution, which was around 53.4% in this study, was so much higher than the other's contribution at 31%, it's a massive 22% difference, is precisely because participants perceive themselves as using ChatGPT more for inspiration and less for just outsourcing the task. That's the psychological engine driving the bias. And interestingly, an additional exploratory study they ran, study A1, added another layer. When people rated their own contribution and ChatGPT's contribution separately, not just splitting 100 points, they inferred a higher contribution for themselves and simultaneously a lower contribution for ChatGPT when it was their own work.
So it's not just boosting our own credit, we're actively downplaying the AI's role in our own success.
It seems that way. It implies people kind of see human and AI contributions as complementary, maybe like a dance where they feel they're clearly leading, even if the AI is doing a lot of the steps.
Fascinating. Okay, so the bias is consistent. We get the why. It's about how we frame intentions. But what about the real-world impact? especially around the acceptability of using Gen AI. This feels super relevant for schools, workplaces.
Absolutely. And that's exactly where Study 5 went. They ran it with both UK participants and US students, really digging into acceptability in two very common, very relatable situations: writing a job application letter and completing a student assignment.
Yeah, situations with real stakes.
Definitely.
And what did they find about acceptability? Was there a similar double standard there too? Did the bias carry over?
It absolutely did. Consistently, using Gen AI was considered significantly more acceptable for the self than it was for others. For instance, in one part of the study, self-acceptability scored, say, 4.28 out of 7,
No.
but only 3.80 when judging others. In another part, it was 3.57 for the self versus 3.21 for others.
So the bias in perceived contribution translates directly into how acceptable we think the behavior is.
Exactly. The higher credit we give ourselves leads directly to higher acceptability for our own use. We're okay with our use of the tool, but less so with others. It's a clear double standard in action.
This has got to be incredibly relevant for those ongoing, often pretty heated debates in education right now, doesn't it? Did they specifically look at how students and teachers see this? Because their perspectives are inherently different in that situation.
They did, yes. They ran an additional study, Study A2, which involved hundreds of teachers and students from both the US and the UK. And the results really shone a spotlight on a very clear perception gap. Students perceive their own contribution to an assignment, when they use Gen AI, as substantially higher, around 68.7% on average.
Okay.
But the credit teachers gave them for that same assignment, much lower, closer to 59.3%.
Almost a 10% difference in perception there.
Right. And similarly, students found Gen AI usage significantly more acceptable overall than teachers did. It really underscores this fundamental disconnect, this different way of seeing things, between those creating with Gen AI and those tasked with evaluating it. It's a major challenge for academic integrity, for sure.
That's a truly crucial finding for anyone working in education today. Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together. We've gone through 9 studies. What are the big overarching conclusions from this really deep dive into self-other biases with Gen AI?
Well, several key takeaways really stand out. First, and this is so important, the bias is incredibly robust. This self-other difference in inferred contribution isn't some small, flaky finding. It has a large average effect size across all the studies.
Meaning it's a strong, reliable effect.
Very strong, very reliable. And it holds true across diverse groups, different nationalities, students, the general public, and across all the different experimental setups, whether it's real usage or imagined usage, across different types of tasks. It really seems to be a universal human tendency when interacting with this tech. Second, and this one's a bit surprising, even though we give ourselves more credit, people still acknowledge that ChatGPT contributes a lot. On average, even when evaluating their own work, people attributed around 54% of the contribution to themselves, meaning 46% to the AI. When judging others, they gave the AI even more credit, around 62%.
So even we admit the AI is doing a huge chunk of the work.
Yes, it implies that people are, perhaps quite quickly, getting used to the idea of letting Gen AI perform a substantial part of their tasks. We're talking potentially more than half the work, even when they see themselves as the creator. It's not just a minor helper, it's a major collaborator, or maybe even the main engine sometimes.
That's a significant realization.
It is. Third takeaway. There are undeniable double standards in acceptability. The research couldn't be clearer on this. People are much harsher judging others' Gen AI use than their own. Our personal stance on whether it's okay isn't fixed. It shifts dramatically based on whether we're the one benefiting from the tool or the one evaluating someone else using it. Classic human nature really just applied to new tech.
Right, makes sense. What else?
Fourth, there's the question of evaluator accuracy. Can people actually tell when Gen AI has been used and how much? The authors did something really interesting here. They used an AI detection tool, GPT-0, as a sort of objective benchmark and compared its estimates with human judgments.
Okay, comparing human intuition versus an AI detector.
Exactly. And they found the tool's estimate of human contribution was highly correlated with the creator's own self-estimates, like 81–84% similar, which suggests the tool is pretty good at reflecting what the creator felt they did.
That validates the tool, somewhat.
It does. But interestingly, the tool's estimate also showed a significant, though weaker correlation with the evaluator's estimates of others' contributions, somewhere between 26% and 57%.
So evaluators can pick up on it to some extent.
It suggests they can detect variations in AI use, yes. And crucially, that correlation seemed to be getting stronger over time. People are getting better at spotting it, or at least sensing the degree of AI involvement. It's a skill that seems to be developing.
Okay, that's important. And the last big point.
The last one is about who is actually biased. Is it mainly the creator inflating their role or the evaluator unfairly diminishing the other person's role? The findings lean pretty strongly towards the primary bias lying with the creator.
With ourselves.
With ourselves, yes. Creators tend to significantly underestimate GenAI's actual contribution to their own work, compared to what the AI detection tool estimated. We're talking a gap of maybe 15% to 19%. The evaluator's bias, while it was there in some early studies, seems less consistent and maybe even shrinking over time. So it really looks like it's the creator's inflated sense of their own input that's the more persistent and significant issue here.
That's a really profound set of conclusions, and these insights have immediate practical implications across so many areas, don't they?
Absolutely. Just think about educators and students, for example. This research basically explains why they often clash over GenAI use and acceptability. It's that self-other bias playing out directly. So awareness of this bias is just crucial for navigating the future of education. Maybe educators could encourage students to use GenAI specifically for inspiration. Tools like Khan Academy's Khanmigo that guide, but don't just do the work, rather than for complete outsourcing, which everyone seems to agree is less acceptable.
Clear guidelines and open conversations seem key.
Essential. Then you have marketing professionals. Sure, GenAI offers huge savings in time and cost for creating content, analyzing trends. But there's a risk. If clients or customers perceive an agency as just, pushing a button on an AI, they might seriously underestimate the human skill, the strategy, the creativity involved. They might devalue the service.
So companies need to be clear about their added value.
Exactly. They need to emphasize the human element, the expertise that goes beyond what the AI can do on its own. And that links to the next point, the importance of transparency. We accept tools like spell checkers without needing a big disclosure.
Right, it's just assumed.
But GenAI feels different. The research suggests that being explicit about how GenAI was used could actually lead to more realistic judgments, both from creators about their own work and from evaluators. Some scientific journals are already moving this way, requiring authors to disclose GenAI use. It's about building trust as this technology becomes more integrated.
That makes sense, building new norms.
Yeah. And finally, there's a message here for tech developers, the people building these AI tools. The research suggests maybe designing interfaces that give users some feedback on their relative contribution versus the AIs. Could that nudge people towards more genuine collaboration?
Like a little meter showing human versus AI input.
Maybe something like that. Could it steer users away from just hitting generate and towards a more interactive, co-creative process? It's an interesting design challenge.
So across the board, it really sounds like the paper is advocating for more collaborative practices with GenAI rather than just handing everything over to the machine.
Precisely. The authors make it very clear. Look, it's unrealistic to think people will just stop using GenAI. The benefits are too significant. The real choice isn't if we use it, but how we engage with it. Are we passively outsourcing tasks, or are we actively co-producing value with the AI? And understanding these deep-seated psychological biases, like the self-other bias, is absolutely vital if we want to foster truly meaningful, ethical, and productive human-AI collaboration going forward.
That really was an incredibly insightful exploration. It really makes you stop and think about how many of our everyday judgments are shaped by these subtle biases, especially now with AI becoming so deeply embedded in everything. It definitely casts human-AI collaboration in a new light.
It really does. And for you, our listener, maybe the biggest insight from this deep dive is that our perception of AI's role, its contribution, it isn't objective fact. It's deeply subjective, isn't it? It's profoundly influenced by these inherent biases we carry about ourselves versus how we see others.
So what's the final thought for people to mull over after hearing all this?
Well, in a world where GenAI can increasingly take on really complex tasks, this research poses, I think, a really important question for all of us. How do you, personally, consciously choose to integrate AI into your work or your studies in a way that genuinely amplifies your own unique human contribution? How do you ensure it's not just a shortcut, but a true collaboration that showcases your skills and insights? And maybe the harder part, how can you use this awareness to assess the contributions of others more fairly? How can you try to recognize and maybe compensate for that natural tendency we all have to see ourselves through a much more generous and often biased lens? It's definitely something worth considering as AI continues to weave itself more and more tightly into the very fabric of our lives.
A really provocative thought to end on there. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into self-other biases in Gen AI. We certainly hope it's given you some new perspectives and plenty of valuable insights to chew on.